And welcome to a brand new video and audio series, Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We're here to keep you up to date with the latest news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. As always, my co-hosts join me today, a man on a mission to keep marketing simple. He is the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast. He's also the host of the Roger Vlog video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Hi Pascal, how are you doing? I hope you've had a good week. And you are also a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. You're the host of the Content Marketing Studio podcast. Pascal Fintoni.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Listen, thank you to you, Roger, for joining me again for today. I think it's criminal to have so much fun when this is meant to be work time. Thank you to our audience, viewers and listeners for your support. As they say around here, this is a big one today. We've got lots to go through, so let's begin with this week in the news. All right, let's begin with Coca-Cola, who is letting go of brands that are not working any longer, the so-called zombie brands, in an attempt to recover from the pandemic faster than the competition and indeed the global economy.
And another big brand, McDonald's, is going back to advertising as it celebrates Return of the Mac. So McDonald's is launching a major new marketing campaign to mark the reopening of its restaurants after falling silent during the lockdown.
With the absence of recovering revenues and the end of the furlough scheme soon upon us, Roger, companies are looking to cut costs, in part by cutting jobs, sadly, including marketing positions.
The UK government is introducing a new strapline, Check, Change, Go, as the deadline for the UK leaving the EU approaches.
Now, Netflix has won the opening battles of the streaming wars. The company Q2 earnings overreached and overachieved in just about all imaginable ways. The question is, Roger, will this success continue?
This is an important one. YouTube is adding mental health information panels to its videos. Now, beginning this week, users who search for either illnesses like mental health, depression, anxiety will see pop-up information and online tools.
This year, podcast advertising revenue as predicted to grow over 15%. Now, this is according to the Interactive Advertising Bureau. The prediction, Roger, is that this year the revenue will surpass $812 million in face of COVID-19.
My goodness, that's a massive amount. And according to thenextweb.com, Chinese short video platform TikTok might be sold to a number of US-based investors. And now that's a move that could ease the concerns amongst governments about data and protection of its users.
These were some interesting headlines, some kind of hard-hitting news, weren't they, Roger?
I mean, last week on the show, we talked a lot about slogans, so I'm not going to dwell upon this too much, but that government one, Check, Change, Go. Do you know, you've probably spotted it already, but there's a pattern to all of these government slogans that we've seen over the last 18 months to 2 years. They're always bite-sized 3-word slogans like Get Brexit Done and now Check, Change, Go. And I think all the slogans they had during the COVID crisis have always also been 3-word slogans.
Yeah, no, I must say I can't be too critical because I'm a big lover of the rule of 3. I use it in my training with some of the alliteration that I use and some of the acronyms and so on. But I do wonder sometime whether there's a risk of oversimplifying something which is a lot more complex. But I suppose you need to start somewhere, check, change, go. And then are you meant to then become curious about what is meant behind those 3 simple terms and go deeper?
I think that's the case. And also I think it's a little bit early to be saying check, change, go, because we don't actually know what to check yet, do we? Because they haven't really agreed what the rules are going to be after we leave the EU. But let's not get into a political discussion.
No, we'll move on from that. But I think you're right. It was interesting that you chose, obviously, this content spotlight on slogan, and then sure enough, within days or at the same time that this came about, I wouldn't envy someone working in comms for government at the moment because they've got so many different messages to go out at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but they must communicate clearly. And I think this is where perhaps on occasion that oversimplification gives you some problem. I'd like to explore, if you don't mind. I'd like to hear your view, Roger, about this news from Coca-Cola divesting of those brands not performing. What do you make of it?
I actually think it's probably a good thing, but a massive organisation like Coca-Cola has a huge house of brands, doesn't it? And like a lot of us, people will grow attached to each of those brands, and no doubt within the depths of Coca-Cola HQ, each brand and each sub-brand has its own team of people, and that team of people will be fiercely protective of each individual brand, and there'll be a lot of internal pressure to keep everything going. And I guess that the COVID crisis, like anything, has focused their attention as it's focused everybody else's attention. And I think that sometimes it's a good thing to do a bit of spring cleaning. Which brands aren't performing? Reassess them. Do you know? If you have to dump the brand, fine. If you have to tweak the brand, fine. But it's a good opportunity to focus and reflect. And I think the danger is that you just let things keep going, and eventually they sort of decline on their own. And it's probably better to halt that decline before it gets too steep.
I mean, for me, it was a reminder that it is a normal business activity to let go and close and shut those brands, projects, and so on. And I wonder whether, in a way, there's a reminder for all of us, no matter the size of the operation, to not worry. I mean, I would have a tendency, Roger, to be quite sentimental about business activities or even the marketing, content marketing. I would have difficulty letting go of a video series, for example, that is not performing. And I think that that's a difference between, forgive me, business decision and one which is more personal. So I'm like you, I don't think it's sinister, far from it. I think it's just a reminder that that's part of the portfolio of decision-making process that you have to go through as a business, whether you let go of suppliers, because again, it's no longer part of your operations, whether you let go of brands. I think for me, bear in mind our specialism, it's a reminder of review the marketing activities and don't worry about letting go of one or two or three activities, no matter how emotionally attached you feel, if actually you can reclaim that time and energy and budget potentially to do something that would be more productive.
Absolutely. Constantly refine your offer in respect to feedback that you get from your customers and also the effect it has on your bottom line.
Right. Roger, let's slow things down if you don't mind, and let's move on to our content spotlights. So this is the segment where each week Roger and I pick one article, one video, one webinar, one podcast that just made us stop on our tracks, made us think about something a bit differently, and we bring it to the table. So Roger, what do you have for us this week?
Well, Pascal, I promised myself I wasn't going to use an article from Marketing Week this week, but I'm going to use an article from Marketing Week this week. It's the headline is "Customers' Benevolence Won't Keep Brands Alive. We serve them, not the other way round." This article's written by Mark Ritson. It's quite controversial, actually, but I want to talk about it because it highlights something that all marketers should be aware of. But again, it's a bit like what we were saying before about cutting back brands. Sometimes you let things creep up on you before you even realise that it's happening. Now, Mark uses an example of actually something that was in the news recently. There's a restaurant owner called Tom Kerridge. He was originally on MasterChef many years ago, but he's now gone on to become a Michelin-starred chef. And he was complaining on social media, and his complaint got into the national press, that quite a lot of people were booking tables in his restaurant post-lockdown and then cancelling those tables without letting him know. And he had a right good rant, and a lot of people would have thought it was a deserved rant on social media, and it hit the headlines. I saw it in quite a few of the national papers, and quite a lot of other restaurateurs agreed with Tom Kerridge. It's absolutely appalling that customers are not letting us know that they're cancelling. Now, my initial reaction was to agree with the restaurateur and think, yeah, it's not very good. It's rude, isn't it, that people would do that? They'd book a table and then they'd just not turn up, but they wouldn't cancel. But Mark Ritson's article basically says, well, hold on a second. No, it probably is rude in certain circumstances, but as marketers, we don't know what's happening to the customer. They could have had an illness. They could have come down with COVID. They could have been called away somewhere with a family emergency, and he uses this example to bring up this subject that he calls marketing orientation, and what that means is, as marketers, we eventually sometimes fall into that position where we see ourselves as if we were the customer. And that's possibly what Tom Kerridge is experiencing here. He's thinking, hey, I'm a really good chef. I've got a fab restaurant. I've got a fab menu, and I've got a great location. Why would people do this? Why would people do this to me? But it's not about you. It's about serving the customer. And the problem is if you get yourself into that situation where you see yourself as the customer, then you possibly start making the wrong decisions for your brand, because you make the decisions based upon what you as an individual would do, not what your customers would do. So Mark's saying, yeah, it might be bad that people have cancelled these bookings, but maybe you should have had a mechanism in place to charge them a deposit or some sort of no-show fee. Don't make it about the customer inconveniencing you, because that's not the way brands work. It's all about how you delight the customer in return. And, a lot of people listening to this might not agree with that argument, but and as I say, I actually agreed with the restaurateur the first time I read the article, but actually thinking about it now, I think there is that point. You've got to remind yourself, you're not the customer. As a marketer, you're not the customer. You've got to always ask the customer what they need. And in this circumstance, he didn't know why they didn't turn up, and maybe he should have asked.
I have a lot of sympathy for the situation, circumstance, but also for me, that has to be the number one challenge, and probably the biggest challenge when you work in marketing and any form of business development, which is to truly understand the customer and walk in their shoes. And I always say, I wish I could know and feel what it's like to go maybe on a website for the first time. I wish I would know what it's like to open the box for the first time. As when you are the very inventor of the website experience, when you are the person who's designed that restaurant experience, you are the least likely able to, take steps back and be critical and see where there could be some improvement. How many times have you heard, Roger, of people doing a customer survey and being surprised by the results? Surprised by the result in terms of information that they didn't know or never considered.
Yeah, I mean, you could boil it down like this. Let's say you're redesigning your website and you come up with 1, 2, 3 different designs. And let's just, for the sake of argument, say there's a red design, a green design, and a yellow design. And you take it out to research, and all the customers say, we like the green design. But you're sitting there thinking, well, hang on a second, I prefer red, so I'm going with red. That's market orientation. That's where you do what you would think is what the customer wants. But you're basing that decision upon your own personal choice, and you're not the customer. So you need to listen to your customers and go with the green design.
And I think also this article, listening to you, Roger, reminds me of something that we need to try and do a lot more than perhaps we can, which is always, because there is a cancellation or because there is a no-show, the reaction shouldn't be to be frustrated and to think of, again, that negativity. But I think you mentioned it, flip it and say, well, what has happened? Yeah. Perhaps something quite significant. And I think if you do that cerebral gymnastics more often, you'll be in a more positive frame of mind, but of course you'll be more likely to actually get in touch and say anything we can do to help, or do you want to rebook and whatever. But it's not easy, and I'm glad you bring it up, because for me there has to be, I've been in the world of marketing since the mid-90s, and from the travel industry all the way to manufacturing, all the way to professional services, and really, really understanding the customer is something that is so, so hard.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But you are not the customer. Your customer is the customer. We should never forget that.
Thanks for the reminder. Now, Roger, I'd like to continue actually a little journey in the world of webinars, online conferences, and virtual experiences, which I think we've been touching on in the different content spotlights. Only this week, I attended a webinar. Sometimes I like to be on the spectator side, if that makes any sense, Roger, just to give me a break. And there's a platform called On24. I don't know if you've come across it before, On24. It's kind of an enterprise solution for people who like the big brands. We're talking about big high street brands who want to provide online conferences and virtual kind of experiences to their resellers, to their customers, and so on. It's really quite rich in features. Their VP of marketing is a guy called Mark Bernstein, and he's the one that delivers a lot of their tutorial on how to use On24. He's a self-confessed, listen to this, webinerd. He's a webinerd. I just loved it, and I was thinking, you can be a webby newbie or webinerd. So it's a webinerd. He loves all things webinar, and he invited people on his mailing list to something called 10 Common Mistakes to Avoid in 2020. Now, typically, Roger, I don't go for those titles. I think that's something you mentioned yourself, where the listicles, the kind of numbers, and also that when there's a slight negative angle, the 10 common mistakes as opposed to 10 things to do to get it right. But I trust Mark and I trust the webinerd. So I thought, tell you what, I'll go. And as you can tell by the way I'm telling you, and the way I'm smiling and in my voice and so on, it was one of the funniest webinar I attended. The title actually should be 10 horrible things that happened to me, and I wish it doesn't happen to you. So I'm not going to go through all 10 in details, but if I just go through the list and you can just nod and smile and laugh as I go through them. In a way, I think Mark was having a bit of a go at guests on webinars.
Oh, right.
A lot more than maybe the people that would deliver and the hosts and so on. That said, so his core message, which I think I know you and I explored, is just because it's a webinar, just because it's just you in your spare bedroom with a laptop, don't under-prepare and don't underestimate the amount of commitment to the event. It's similar to if you were to go to a physical venue.
Yeah.
So 10. Number 1, test everything you're going to use on the day. You're going to be using slides, you're going to be using videos, you're going to use a poll, you're going to use a Q&A, the chat room and so on. You've got to test everything for 2 things. If something goes wrong, you know what to do about it, but hopefully you can also do remedy. But he says, don't just turn up on the day and hope that it's going to go well. Even more so if it's a new platform for you as a guest or as a host. Number 2, no rock star arrival. So that builds on to number 1, which is, and I think on this one, it was very clear, is addressing the guest. If you're a guest, don't just turn up at 5 to 10 for a 10 o'clock webinar. Minimum half an hour earlier. You would not do that, I hope so, if it was a physical event, because you have to travel. And usually, I'm sure, Roger, you do that. You go to a venue, you try the mic on, you try the clicker, all those things. So no rock star arrival. Number 3, be on brand. Where possible, claim the virtual space with your colors, your logos, and so on. There's limitation, but make sure that it's a truly immersive experience, and so on and so forth. Number 4, which I don't see people do often enough, at the beginning, give people a tour of the platform. Think about it, Roger. If someone went to a physical venue, there will be a form of meet and greet for them to know where the restrooms are, where the cloakroom are, where the networking bit's going to happen. They will be given the agenda for the day. There will be all manner of orientation. Do the same for your virtual guest. 2 things. It's good customer care. It also gives you a chance to warm your voice and so on and so forth. Number 5, make sure that you show your face. And I know that there's been some time, Roger, where you've been online where it wasn't required. But it says, with regard to the experience, this is about video format. And find a way to be happy with your face. It sounds awful, doesn't it? But find a way to get past essentially the fact that you're online.
Face for radio.
And more importantly, make sure that when you do the webinar or the virtual, don't look at your face. So be happy to be online, but don't look at yourself, because otherwise you cut the line of sight and so on. Number 6, avoid what he called toxic slides. This is still nonetheless a an event as in presentation event. It's not a business meeting. So avoid complex graphics and avoid too many words. It sounds very, very simple, but again, there lies a problem, Roger. A webinar takes place at home on a laptop. This is the same environment where you've been busy a moment ago creating maybe a document or a board report and that kind of things. Be careful. This is not the environment. Number 8, which I must say I don't do enough, have backups for all your kit. So, for example, if the laptop was to crash, what is your backup? If the Wi-Fi was to go, what's your backup? So it's almost, remember the old days of the Dr. Pepper adverts? What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, everything.
So can you make a list of the tech that you are reliant on? And have you got a plan B or C? So he was saying, for example, I've seen people do that more often now, probably because it's happened to them. They joined the webinar on the second laptop as a guest. If you ever go on the webinar or virtual event, Roger, and you see in the list of attendees someone called guest, it's actually the backup for the presenter. Which is kind of interesting. And plan C, if you like, would be if you haven't got the second laptop, would be to use your mobile. Number 9, extend the journey. So extend the journey after. People tend to be pretty good, Roger, with regard to pre-event communication and that kind of things. But post-event is important. Do you want to, on the day, invite them to another webinar? Do you want to point them to content on your website? Do you actually have a hub where all the other sessions have taken place and find a way to extend the experience? Number 10, and he was addressing here the sales team. That could be the same individual, of course, if you run a micro business. But make sure that the attendees are then segmented into different groups. Don't treat them the same way. A very, very important reminder. So instead of really getting the thank you for attending message en masse, perhaps those who interacted with you in a Q&A session could be looked at as your A-listers and be looked after differently, even get some swag. Then you have the B's listers and the C listers. So using segmentation and the CRM after the webinar was important to him. But again, the manner and the how joyous it was to listen to someone sharing the horrible stories of what had gone wrong. I was so pleased Ashley did go ahead, despite the title give me reasons to maybe think that it wasn't quite for me.
These are just. I mean, when you go through them, you think actually these are pretty obvious, aren't they? But again, maybe it's because a lot of us have been quickly rushed into using more online tools and techniques like this, that there is that thinking, we'll just be able to either wing it or we'll just be able to trust the technology. But yeah, you're absolutely right. How many times have you been to a conference and you yourself were stood on stage at Upreneur Summit last year in front of 350 people and your radio mic broke down?
Oh, yes, I forgot that.
They had to come up on stage and give you a handheld mic. And that, you coped incredibly well with it, but it wasn't what you wanted. You wanted to be able to use your arms and be expressive, and you can't do that when you've got a handheld mic. So in all the ways that you would have backup plans in a live in-person conference like that, you've got to assume that things can go wrong in a webinar. But it's interesting, when you said 10 common webinar mistakes, I thought you were actually going to include one which would have been about the actual content of the webinar, because there's that age-old presentation technique, isn't there? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. But I seem to go to a lot of webinars these days where it's tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you're going to tell them for about 5 minutes, and then sell. And I don't like those sort of webinars.
No, and in a way, I'm worried that the term webinar is going to start to get hijacked by that poor experience. So recently I was asked to do some coaching on webinars, and I said, we have to start to use different terms, because there's an association now that is quite negative, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some people now, when they get invited to a webinar, they think, I'm not going to that. I'm just going to get sold to. A webinar is another piece of content, and it should be an educational piece of content. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't sell, but give people the content before you get into that. And again, this preamble that quite a lot of webinar hosts build in, they just lead up to it. And I'm sitting there thinking, for goodness sake, just tell me.
Absolutely. So what I thought you would enjoy this one because, of course, you're so busy on stage, both physical and virtual. Now, Roger, time is against us, so we must move on to our next segment. So, Roger, welcome to this week's Marketing, Tech and Apps segment. Every week, Roger and I choose 2 apps and online solutions that make life easier as marketers and content creators. I'm just curious, once again, Roger, what have been your picks of the week?
Okay, this is interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram, Pascal. I quite like the platform, and there's some great photographs out there, and I love to see what people are taking pictures of their travel experiences, products, behind the scenes, just everything. It is a nice platform, but I do sometimes find it quite frustrating. I like stories, and I'm quite interested in Instagram TV as well. And I came across this website. It's called Desktopify. That's a great word, isn't it? Desktopify. And it's actually a complete sort of recreation of the Instagram app, but it's on the desktop.
Right.
So you've got a lot more space, and it also allows you to upload videos to your stories. It also allows you to upload videos to IGTV. And because you've got more space to play around with, if you're playing the hashtag game, you could have hashtags saved in a Word document, and you just copy them into your post. So I've suddenly found that this Desktopify has sort of rekindled my interest in Instagram. So it's a great thing to look for. It's one of those, what do you call it? It's like a widget in Chrome, a Chrome add-on, I think they call it. And actually, I also thought I would mention, one of the things that has always annoyed me about Instagram is that you can't hit return at the end of a sentence and then hit return again and have a space between your paragraphs. They all sort of clump it all together. And you've always had to find some nifty little apps somewhere else on the internet to add those spaces in and without having to put lots of rogue full stops in. Well, actually, Instagram have fixed that now. You can actually put spaces in between lines, which to me is just much more pleasing on the eye. So thanks for doing that, Instagram. The second app, and this isn't technically a marketing tool actually, but obviously our lives have changed with COVID. We've been locked in for a long time, and now of course we're starting to go out. But one of the things I've been doing a lot more of whilst the lockdown has been in force has been walking. And I came across this app. Again, it's for Android and iOS devices. It's called Strava walking, running and cycling. And basically it's just a nice little app that you take with you. It's in your pocket. It measures the number of steps you take. It's got this great GPS feature so that at the end of your walk or your cycle or your run, you press a button and it downloads a map of the local area, presumably from Google Maps or something like that. And then it plots a nice little red line showing you exactly where you've walked. I just love that. It's nice to actually be able to see where you've gone and the distance involved. And it works out calories and elevation and all of those sorts of things. So it satisfies the inner geek in me because, we're two geeks and we've got a marketing podcast, but anything that I can apply to other parts of my life, and fitness instruction has always been a part of my life. I love an app like this because it just brings out my inner geek.
Oh, that's smashing. Thanks very much for all that. I would definitely look at those. So, Roger, this week I want to go back to curation. I'm a big fan of curation.
Yeah.
As a content marketing tactic for a number of reasons. One, to build, obviously, your understanding what's happening around you, but also to show to the world that you're well connected, well researched, and build your reputation in a nice, sociable way, as opposed to just pushing your stuff. But the challenge, of course, is to find content that is going to connect with you and your audience. At times, sometimes can be against you. So I've got 2 that may make life a little easier. They're both web-based. I don't think they've got an app version or one version, but I could check that. The first one is called contentgems.com. Gems as in the precious stones. Contentgems.com. Think of it as your virtual assistant that can go around the web, look for the gems, those kind of content that are going to really kind of hit the mark. So the way you do it is you set up an account, still free to this day. You create profile using keywords, and then literally once you press go find, it will match your keywords to popular content on social media. Now, of course, popularity doesn't mean quality, but at least it's going to take a lot of the legwork and a lot of the line share of having to be the journalist and researcher out there. And the good thing about it, you get a preview of the image, you get a preview of the text just before, particularly if it's an article. You can also filter by just saying, I just want videos, I just want infographics. So you can also filter by type, you can filter by recency. And then within Content Gems as well, you can save and time it, schedule it on Buffer, Hootsuite, and many other platforms. So this virtual assistant has been a boon for me, really. Now, I hasten to add, you're going to find that a lot of it is quite US-centric in terms of content, but that could be just sheer volume. But perhaps, I don't have the data, Roger, whether we have less content creators in the UK, I can't be sure. But you can fine-tune your profiles and keywords. One thing you must not do, Roger, with this platform is agree to the daily digest.
Yes.
Don't do that, Roger. Honestly, I did it at the beginning. I felt like the apprentice sorcerer, from Fantasia, Mickey Mouse, with the buckets of water coming in. So I would say go on Content Gem yourself when in your diary you've kind of created that time where this is my time to curate and then share on social, or to do a roundup of the best, whichever your term is, but don't use, however tempting it might be, the dailies and weeklies, because your inbox will be just full of content. And in fact, it becomes very intrusive. I think it's more, down to you. The second curation tool is something called podchaser.com. As the name might indicate, this is about podcast and podcasting. And podchaser.com allows you to actually do two things. One is to follow, obviously, your favorite shows and favorite podcast creators. But what is lovely, they can be organized into playlists.
Yeah.
So I normally would listen via Stitcher, maybe SoundCloud, maybe Spotify, but usually those platforms allow you to organize yourself and organize your listing beyond maybe categories. This one, you can go down to episodes that can be grouped together from different podcasters. You can obviously group podcasters into themes like marketing, sports, food, that kind of things. And of course, you can share your listings with your audience. So, as you know, I favor video podcasting, but I'm a great consumer of podcasts as audio, and I'd love to share it on. But again, it's a bit like YouTube. On YouTube, you can organize your findings into playlists. I couldn't find a tool until more recently that could do that. But Podchaser is just a wonderful addition, again, to the tools that you have that can allow you to be a good curator, but also to allow people to find, again, your bests of list and that kind of thing. So you go contentgems.com and podchaser.com.
Fantastic.
Shall we move on to, I know, one of perhaps your favorite segment of our podcast, This Week in History?
Let's do it.
So, Roger, let's go back 155 years ago. On July the 20th, 1865, a Frenchman named Pierre Lallemand designed and patented the first bicycle in the US, but received no recognition for introducing an invention that soon became ubiquitous.
And in 1903, Ernest Pfennig, a dentist from Chicago, became the proud owner of a Model A automobile when the Ford Motor Company sold its first car. The car featured a twin-cylinder internal combustion engine.
Fascinating. In 1959, Ed Wood's cult classic Plan 9 from Outer Space premieres. It was called, at the time, one of the worst films ever made.
1962, the Telstar communications satellite sent the first live TV broadcast to Europe. The bird was used to send TV programs between the United States and Europe.
In July the 18th, 1968, Robert Noyce, Andy Grove, and Gordon Moore incorporates Intel in California to build microprocessors. The first one, the 4004, was released in 1971 for use in calculators.
Last week we talked about the launch, Pascal. This week, July the 20th, 1969, Eagle, the Apollo 11 lunar module, successfully lands in an area of the moon known as the Sea of Tranquility, and it was that one small step for man and that one giant leap for mankind.
So much further later, on the 25th of July 1990, Microsoft Corporation reports revenues of more than $1 billion for its fiscal year. But, as you can imagine, history will prove that this growth will not stop there.
And July the 21st, 1999, Apple introduces the iBook laptop, the first mainstream computer designed and sold with built-in wireless networking.
Wow, that was some interesting one there. Just quickly on the iBook laptop, so are they saying that 1999, which is not that long ago, I know it's last century officially, but not that long ago, this was the very first one which had wireless networking. The others had essentially wires.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, you had to plug them in.
Wow.
And let's go back to 1959 and just talk about Plan 9 from Outer Space for a moment. Quite honestly, it is one of the worst films ever made. But it's one of those films, Pascal, which is just so bad that it's actually funny. And I think that it says Plan 9 from Outer Space, so you immediately think horror, science fiction. But it is actually more of a horror film, and they had Bela Lugosi as the main star of the film, and of course he's famous for the very earlier Dracula films, and he died into the production. So rather than recast the actor and refilm the shots, they actually just got somebody else to dress up, and got the actor to almost like pull his coat and sort of half cover his face, hoping that the audience wouldn't notice that he wasn't Bela Lugosi. How they thought they could get away with that, I don't know.
But in a way, Edward, as a film producer, director, whichever term you want to use, that was just his style at the time. Was not immortalized by Johnny Depp, actually, a movie about the life of Ed Wood?
I think he probably was, yeah, absolutely.
I think they explored, obviously, his way. I think he was probably quite deluded as a filmmaker, but got on with it. Plan 9 from Outer Space, the worst film ever made.
Absolutely. But go and watch it.
What is interesting about this segment, I think it's purely accidental that I think pretty much every single week we manage to find something about a Frenchman. And I want to reassure our viewers and listeners that I'm not making, or you're not making a special effort. It just so happens that through our research, we stumbled upon something like that. But in terms of the automobile, the Model A, I remember even my dad telling me about this because it was so significant at the time that, the Ford Motor Company had kind of created a car that was really powerful and reliable and was working well.
And that person didn't really want a car, he just wanted a faster horse.
No, very, very true. Okay, well, that was immense fun. I like that segment. But can we now move on to the next segment, our creators' shout-outs? So in this segment, every week, Roger and I give some of our creators in our local networks and communities beyond, or sometimes the borders of the UK, of course, a shout out to kind of applaud and praise the hard work that goes on, usually behind the scenes, about crafting this amazing content. Roger, out of interest, who do you have this week?
I've been doing a lot of sort of reflection and thinking about speaking recently, again, because of the COVID-19 crisis. I haven't been on stage, I haven't been doing live workshops, just like everybody else, it's all been online. And I've been reflecting upon all sorts of things. Should you do live video? Should you do some pre-recorded? And that's got me thinking and looking at other speakers and just looking for tips. And I came across a podcast by a lady called Sarah Archer, probably about 6 months ago. And she's actually a stand-up comedian in her main job. That's what she does. But she's using the techniques of stand-up, the yes and formula and that sort of thing, and the art of telling stories to effectively make herself a better marketing presenter. And it's a really good podcast. The episodes are quite short. Sometimes it's an interview, but mainly it's just her sharing ideas that she's picked up from being a stand-up comedian. And I just love that, that the experience that she's able to bring. And I think it's very important to, if you're not a stand-up comedian, try not to be or try not to tell jokes in your presentation, because quite often they'll fall flat. But having listened to her podcast, I understand a lot more about how to make presentations and talks funny without actually telling jokes. And she's a great big fan of those sort of situational awareness humour that you can build into a good presentation. And the second one, again, has come from this sort of me looking around for ideas to improve my speaking. And I came across a podcast which has actually been around for a hell of a long time. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of this. So now I've found it, I'm going to binge on it, obviously. It's called The Moth Podcast, The Moth Podcast. And basically, The Moth is an American thing, and it's people come on stage and they tell stories. Now, they're not stand-up comedians, but they tell stories, and some of them are very humorous. Again, maybe situational comedy and that sort of thing, or observational comedy. That's another way of doing it. And some of them are just telling stories of personal experiences, how they met their wife, how they met their partner, how they climbed a mountain, how they first drove a car. Some of it, initially you think, well, that's going to be a bit mundane, isn't it? But it's not the subject matter that interests me. It's the technique that they use to deliver it. And each one only lasts probably between 6 and 10 minutes. I've never heard one that's longer than that. And just by listening to this, you can hear. I mean, you're a massive fan of storytelling and the hero's journey and Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, that sort of thing. And The Moth, to me, encapsulates all of those storytelling techniques into one podcast.
Wow. Well, listen, I'm certainly going to look into that myself. But you making reference to technique gives me a wonderful segue to my 2 content creators shout outs. In fact, Roger, I'm going to cheat with it. There's 4 people, right, but they come from 2 content creation efforts. So as I was kind of gathering my thoughts and jotting down, who recently impressed me or just, I was just very pleased for them, it revealed itself, the fog kind of cleared. And I discovered that this week, almost randomly, I've chosen 2 video podcast with 2 co-hosts, if you will. Right. So like us, a duo or a duet. I never know which one to use. The very first one is Brain Bites, right, by Marcel Sturck and Darren Winter. And like us, they have a bit of an international element to their duo. So Marcel is from the Netherlands. Durham is actually not far from where I live in Durham, south of the region. And they actually were the host of a podcast, which ran for quite some time, called Marketing Unplugged. I actually was fortunate enough to be one of their guests. And recently they announced that they were doing the Coca-Cola move of, we're going to change. We think there's a better way for us to use our time, but also to add value to our guests. And they've gone for a short form video podcast called Brain Bites, and the format and the technique is lovely because they've gone for the music and the animated intro, and they've got the segments and so on and so forth. And what they do is they take one kind of hard hitting business topic. You find recently I saw Darren would read out maybe an article, or would just, I prepared a statement of sort, quite challenging. And then they spend 10 minutes reflecting and literally challenging themselves about something that they perhaps have not thought of before. Get the brain to bite, to kind of get busy. Get it. And it's just a lovely format. It feels crafted. It feels kind of thought through. And they've began pretty much at the same time as us as well, which is just coincidence. So I thought it would be lovely to give them a shout out and to wish them the very best as well. The next video podcast series is called the Mobile Creator Podcast. Mobile Creator Podcast. 2 hosts again. We've got Glenn Mulcahy and Courtney G. Jones. Again, international duet, because Glenn is from Ireland, I do believe, or certainly spent a lot of time there, and Courtney is from Seattle. And as the name would indicate, Roger, the Mobile Creator Podcast is all about that video journalism using mobile technology, but bringing high-end productions. The reason for that is both Glenn and Courtney come from a TV and film production background. And with that in mind, I'm sure they can't help themselves to bring the high concept production, thinking about series, thinking about, guests, appearance, and so on. and I just love the production of the technique of the show. The music choice is excellent at the beginning, the animation, the way they go back and forth between the two of them and so on. It was just a pleasure to listen and watch them. But again, I just thought, interesting. Another series, video podcast with segments and so on. I'm not saying that, you need some reassurance, but it's nice not to feel so alone in our pursuit in a crazy journey as content creators.
I'll have to check both of those out, Pascal, definitely.
Excellent. Listen, I hope that we've not taken too much time away from an important segment for Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, which is film marketing. So, Roger, today, the film that we've chosen, you and I, is Wonder Woman 84.
Right.
Definitely. Scheduled to be released many times, but Warner Brothers would be kept hanging. Let me remind you, Roger, the journey of Wonder Woman 84.
Okay.
First release date, December 2019. Then this was changed because of the Star Wars release that was clashing. It was then say, actually, what we'll do, we'll bring it forward for you lovely fans to November 2019. Then they said, actually, now we've got a few things to sort out, so we'll release it in June 2020. But actually, now we're going to do is push it till August because of the pandemic. Actually, do you know what? It'll be October 2020. So according to the latest news, the world premiere, which will be across, is, as far as we know now, October 2020.
Oh.
For a project of any kind, whether it's marketing, film, or whatever, this is not great, is it?
No. I mean, will it ever get released?
Well, the problem that you have, Roger, is that now you've got so many movies all piling up near the end of the year. I mean, I did a bit of a recce, but you've got so many movies now. You've got Mulan, you've got Dune, you've got Bond 25, you've got Bill and Ted Face the Music, you've got Black Widow, you've got Kong and Godzilla, you've got West Side Story, the remake by Steven Spielberg, which is really anticipated,
and Tenet as well.
Yeah, you're right,
yeah.
And a few others out there. It's going to get a bit crowded, and I hope it does. I'm a fan. Are you?
Yeah, definitely. I want to see it. Do you know, I mean, I can remember the TV series of Wonder Woman from back in the late 70s, early 80s. Can't even remember what the actress was called that played Wonder Woman, but Linda Carter, that was it. Yes, I'm giving myself a slap for forgetting that. But it was always that sort of, she'd have a look round and she'd do the little twirl and the big bang and the explosion, a really cheesy special effect. And of course, she changed into Wonder Woman. It's funny because I knew we were going to talk about Wonder Woman this week. I actually went to see if I could find any old episodes on YouTube, and I came across, it was an episode from the third series, which was actually broadcast in 1979, believe it or not, and it was called The Phantom of the Roller Coaster. And I actually remember watching that as a child vividly, because obviously it takes place in a theme park. But now I'm a geek, of course. What I hadn't realised is that the majority of the theme park footage that was included within that episode was actually lifted from a different feature film, which was called Roller Coaster, which starred George Segal, who was one of my favourite character actors from that time. And as a result of that, my wife and I searched out for Roller Coaster, the film, and watched that the other night, and it was great to see it. And of course, all of that footage that ended up in Wonder Woman was originally in that film. And that Roller Coaster film was filmed in Sensurround. And if you ever went to the cinema, they had a tiny little vibrating microphone in each seat, just to make you feel as if you were actually on the roller coaster. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but bring it back to Wonder Woman now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, through again, we watched the series in France, I would say the early 80s, mid 80s. I mean, albeit they were filmed, from the mid 70s to the late 70s. I think the popularity of the TV series carried on for well into the 80s. And I wonder whether, because I don't know about you, I wonder why they chose 84 for Wonder Woman. So as a reminder, the original character, I think, in and around the Second World War,
Yeah.
for a reason which I think was around not clashing with the Marvel universe.
Hmm.
The Wonder Woman of 2017 was in the First World War, and then we
Yeah.
go straight into 84. And I always kind of wondered why 84. Do you have any views or insight into that?
I can just, the only reason I can think is there seems to be a little bit of nostalgia for the 80s at the moment, doesn't it? Doesn't there? I don't know whether it's a 30 years in the future thing. It's a bit like we were talking about Back to the Future last week, and Back to the Future 2 came out, and then 30 years later was 2015. There seems to be that 30-year thing, doesn't there? So 30 years ago, ish, 1984, 1985, a bit more than 30 years, but it's around there. There's that nostalgia for shoulder pads, permed hairstyles, vivid colours, and it just feels very Wonder Woman-y to me.
I think also from a film design, but also marketing design point of view, that gave them so much to choose. I mean, I have to tell you, I really, really connected with the artwork of the posters,
Yes.
teaser content.
Yeah.
So as a reminder, Roger, the trailer actually was released early December 2019.
Yeah.
That, almighty music. Remind me again, because I know you're a big fan. What was the music they used for the trailer?
Blue Monday.
That's right, by New Order. I mean,
can I just stop you there?
Please,
I've got a surprise for you, Pascal. Yeah, I'm just going to reach down here. This. Can you see this?
Yeah, tell me it's the LP,
Okay.
Is it?
Yeah. Now I'll tell you what, because some of you will be watching this, so you can see. Some of you will be listening to this. This is the original pressing from 1984. The original pressing of Blue Monday. And it was only ever released as a single, but it was only ever released as a 12-inch single, and it's got this very, very iconic design. It was almost like a floppy disk. Can you see yeah? So you take it out inside, and there you have it. I dug this out specially this morning. Blue Monday, the original pressing.
Well, if anyone of you are listening audio only, you may want to just, fast forward to this bit to see, the LP or the 12-inch. Of course, if you're under the age of 30, you have no clue what Roger's talking about.
And of course, I did think we should play the music on the podcast, but then we'll get a copyright strike, so we can't do that.
Even if we try and claim the fair use angle. But I remember when the trailer was released. So, Roger, every Saturday morning, I have a routine where I go on YouTube, and there is a channel called Kino Check.
Yeah.
They do essentially a compendium of the trailers of the week or whatever. And I watch that. It's my way. Sadly, I don't buy magazines anymore. Maybe I should go back to those. Back in the days, I used to buy Total Film and Premiere and all that kind of things. So when the Wonder Woman kind of landed, I watched it and I put the sound so loud because that track, just made it. So I think there was a wonderful design. So the reason I'm saying this, Roger, is I feel for the marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
Not only do you have to keep cancelling and whatever, and I know that when it comes to the fans of both DC and Marvel Universe, there's a mountain of goodwill and so on, but you've got to be careful. So to give you an idea, they've been promoting and talking about Wonder Woman 84 since 2018.
Yeah.
Every year at the San Diego Comic-Con, it's almost like the ritual, for all the big kind of geek style movies. They talk about it. Then there's all the press. You can imagine that, year after year, it's coming. And then, of course, apart from the trailer, we've had nothing. Even though at early March, there was already the start of the pandemic, the Warner Brothers studios still went ahead with the campaign. Now, I didn't see the campaign. I just obviously researched it. But in the US, they had the hashtag 84 to WW84. So they did the 84-day countdown to the release of Wonder Woman back at the original date of would have been June, I would suspect, from March till 84 days later. So that Twitter campaign obviously still went ahead and led to nothing. There's just, something off. Now, the reason why I have some faith about October 2020, to take your point earlier, is that every year, October is on the 21st of October is Wonder Woman Day, which I know you'd
Yeah,
partake
yeah,
with
yeah.
your very special outfit. Now, as you know, why 21st? Because legend would suggest that this is when the character was first released in the comic book format. So I'd like to think that to give the marketing team something, a hook, I think they need to go for that 21st of October if they can at all.
I hope so, and I agree with you. There are too many films getting postponed now, and we're building up to, is it better to launch a film, I don't know, direct to video or direct to streaming, and find some way of making it more profitable? Charge people 30 quid to watch it like you would if it was a family going to the cinema. Because surely it can't be good for the studios to all of a sudden be launching 7 or 8 blockbusters over the course of a few days, because that will eat into their revenues anyway. So
yeah, it would, because I
don't know what the solution is.
I don't know, because of all the movies I've listed earlier, I'd love to see all of them, but I'm not going to go to the movies 10 times in the space of 2-3 months, the rest of the year. So I'm going to have to make decisions. But you're right. Maybe they could do a bit like of the Star Wars, when it was released in the 70s. If you buy the family tickets, you get the streaming, you get a copy of the Blu-ray. Now, there could be a family pack, where they could really make it a sense of event. But it is a concern about, these delays and what it means to the willingness for the audience to go. And because the danger, Roger, as you're pointing out, is this, which is, I'll tell you what, then I know it's other movies, but I'll still wait for it to be streamed. So in fact, they've gained nothing.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Now, I'm like you. I think I would be prepared to pay, cinema prices to watch Bond 25 at home, as opposed to having to wait another year. I don't want to wait another year for Bond 25. I want to see it. So I'll happily pay the going rate. So, studios, come on, let's get it out there, please.
And just out of interest, you would pay to own the digital copy on Netflix or on Amazon Prime, whatever.
Yeah, but at the moment, you can rent a video on iTunes or something like that for $9.99. Now that's fine. I could invite 50 of my friends round and we could watch it for $9.99. They need to come up with some way of replicating the revenue that they would get from a cinema where 50 people would pay $9.99. But I'd be happy with that. I'd be absolutely happy with that, as long as I got to see the film this year.
Absolutely. So with regard to this segment, film marketing and Wonder Woman 84, I really, really like the campaign that they've put in place. It's just heartbreaking for them and for the fans that it's not pulled through. But you can't fault, the presence at events such as Comic-Con and so on. So really engagement with the audience, their social media campaigns with their hashtag 84 to WW84, styling, and the crafting of the imagery and the trailer and the music and so on. There was just some good work there, because on balance, is it fair to say that the DC universe is not as popular, or forgive me, not as successful as the Marvel universe in general?
I don't know, Pascal. I don't know. Personally, I feel that the Marvel universe to me has become a bit overbearing. My wife and I did watch Aquaman not so long ago, and we realised in the first 20 minutes we hadn't a clue what was going on. We thought we were coming to this film completely fresh. But of course you had to have watched, and we'd missed a couple of the films that led up to it. So we felt that impinged upon our enjoyment. So possibly DC's got a bit of an advantage because they're earlier in their life cycle, and people maybe find it a bit more accessible. Whereas if you want to watch the latest Marvel film and you haven't watched the previous, goodness knows how many there are now, you literally have to go back, like you would go back to the first episode of Game of Thrones. You have to go back to the original and work your way back to date.
I think that's a very, very fair comment. I always felt as well that DC tended to be more kind of adult and listen to me, I'm talking about superheroes and people flying around in capes and so on. But I think the manner in which the storylines and what they explore was always a little more darker.
Yes.
As opposed to Marvel, which is, this is the family outing, Marvel's family outing. I mean, if you think about it, one of the surprise success, I wasn't surprised, but the critics were surprised by the success of Joker, which is obviously part of the DC universe. And they were even tempted to go for a sub-brand, DC Dark, to be able to do things like Joker. And so I think, the Wonder Woman has its audience. It has an audience, I think, which is back to people used to watch in the 70s or grew with it. I think there's some great message, always will be, but some great messages through this character. But I'm sure that whilst you and I are kind of discussing it from the comfort of our homes, there must be some tough meetings at Warner Brothers HQ. I'd love to visit one day. And, we wish them good luck. And we just hope that October is it and there's no more delays and pushbacks.
I'm with you on that, Pascal.
And thank you so much for listening and watching Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Please subscribe and leave your comments in the usual places. He was Roger Edwards. I was Pascal Fintoni. Until next time, go out there, make sure your marketing is done right.